Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? I'm Nathan Mercereau, and as a financial advisor with over 25 years of experience, I've learned that the quality of the people you spend time with is a lot more valuable than what can show up in a set of financial projections. And growing up in Canada, I discovered you can learn a lot about a person when you spend a day in a canoe with them. So I created this show where I interview people I find interesting and inspiring. I invite you to listen in and learn from their stories so you can create the life you want, one filled with wealth, wisdom, meaning, and purpose. Well, I'm delighted today to be joined by Ian Muir. Ian is Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Advisor Services, Trading and Operations at Charles Schwab. Ian oversees the trading teams for independent investment advisors and oversees risk and control teams for advisor services. He has over 30 years of experience leading global financial service businesses through technology, service, operational, and cultural changes. So a lot of experience. And prior to joining Schwab in 2012, Ian served in several capacities with Bank of America and Merrill Lynch. He led both global wire operations and emerging market operations, oversaw client service and operations for Europe, Middle East, Africa, Canada, and Latin America. And Ian, you and I have had a number of great conversations over the years. And if you don't mind sharing with Day in a Canoe listeners a little bit about your background, where you started, and some of the highlights of your journey.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Nathan. I know there are very high standards here, so I hope I meet them. I'll start with my childhood. I come from a mixed Scottish-English family, which makes me the butt of many jokes in both nations. My father was a working-class Scottish guy. My mom was a sort of fairly refined upper-class English lady, so they made a good match together as a child. I remember most from my Scottish childhood, all comedy is born in someone else's tragedy. And the thing I remember most about my English from, I had my Auntie Lavinia and her Venetian glass that my sister and I were terrified about because we used to go visit and have to be frozen to a chair in case we knocked something over. So I have that background. I pretty much joined, as you would imagine, I joined Merrill Lynch straight out of college with the absolute perfect qualifications for the finance industry, and that was all in English literature. So now I'm very well qualified to read that very sublime email that nobody reads. But I joined Merrill Lynch Bank of America in London and was there a few years, traveled a lot around Europe. Then received an assignment in the US in San Francisco. Then I went to Asia. I was out in Asia 10 years and based out of Hong Kong, but covering everywhere, literally from India through to Japan and from Korea down to Australia, all countries in between. So that was a very big learning experience for me. Met my wife there, who's from New Zealand. Both my daughters were born there. They were born in Hong Kong. After Hong Kong, we were there for 10 years. Then I moved down to Latin America. So one extreme to another. And when I was in Asia, everything was about growth. And I moved down to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and everything was about contraction. And what I learned in Latin America was always negotiate your exit terms as you go in. Because if you start negotiating on the way out, you're kind of in a tight corner. So I was in Latin America for 5 years, then up to New York working on the B of A Merrill Lynch merger, and then back to London. After the merger, I was back in London. The Merrill product was, being overlaid into the US markets, and for B of A because they weren't really selling equities to their retail base. And B of A was very keen to lay the banking product into the Merrill Lynch International Network. So I was in London doing that, and then I started investigating the independent advisor model, which was completely new to me. All the advisors at Merrill Lynch, like many of the big wirehouses, are within the company, and got talking to Bernie Clark, and pretty much the rest is history. I'd been with Merrill Lynch several decades, never mind years. Thought I was there a lifer, but after talking to Bernie we had 2 30-minute meetings. Then I was in San Francisco on the executive floor, meeting a lot of senior people. And a week later, I was a Schwab employee.
Well, you have literally a world of experience, and I now better understand your interest or ability to absorb risk management given your Venetian glass at your aunt's experience. It actually explains a lot.
Exactly.
It's 2023, and we're going through a lot of disruption within the financial world with banks that have collapsed and a lot of concerns about what's going on from an interest rate and financial market standpoint. What's been your learnings over the years around what's a great leader doing during these times? You've obviously seen a lot of economic cycles, but what do you think really embodies the essence of leadership in stages where there's a lot of disruption going on?
Well, what I would say, Nathan, is if you change your leadership style because of the economic environment, you're probably not leading well. Um, Leadership's key, and the qualities of leadership are key through the good and the bad. And when the bad, we come more to the fore. I think there's more of a recognition and understanding of great leadership. But like through all the years, what I always say is you want to be the person that the most talented people in the business, not just in your company, want to work for. So you have to be a great leader because you're being watched at all times, not just during the economic upheaval times, but also during the times when things are, fairly calm, because people want careers, and you have to lead them in and show them where those careers are, help them get the skills that they need and the qualifications that they need, and then help them achieve those careers so that during the disruptive times, you are surrounded by the best team. You can't do everything yourself, right? And I often say to people at Schwab, my job isn't particularly to do anything. My job is to ensure everything is done. And the way that you ensure that is to surround yourself by great people who step to the front when times do get disruptive. And then there's the quality of trust. Clients have to trust you throughout every period. And yeah, for several years over the past, I'd say maybe up to a decade, you buy a basket of good technology stocks, you could sit back and say, do I need an advisor? But if you haven't built a relationship with a trusted financial expert when the times, the volatile times hit, you don't have that relationship to leverage. And that understanding, your advisor's understanding of your life, ambitions and your situation to prepare you for it and to have positioned you in a way that you will weather it better than anyone else.
Well said, Ian. And we find as we work with our clients that such times of change are really opportunities to confirm the things that we've already put in place. We're not coming up with a new strategy,
Right.
like you mentioned with leadership. You don't find a book on leadership that you've never heard of and check it out during times of turbulence. So having a grounded plan, having a thoughtful approach is really the essence of how we serve our clients well, and it's a principle that really resonates within organizations, small or large. Now, I know the leadership experiences that you've had have actually been rooted in some personal experiences. And you strike me as someone that looks for a lesson and a laugh in a lot of opportunities. And I know there's a story that you shared with me about a hike up a mountain, a small mountain. I think it was called Everest, and there was a few interesting lessons that you learned there. Would you mind giving our listeners a little recap?
Yeah, actually, yes. So I did go climbing. Now, first of all, I'm not a climber. I'm not a mountaineer, but I did go with a qualified mountaineer and it was Annapurna. Annapurna won because there are two actually. Everest is very expensive and very crowded. So he chose Annapurna, and I trained for a year. I mean, literally, and I trained seriously for a year with a trainer for a year. I was a much younger man. And honestly, I thought I was going to die. And one of the reasons I did this climb, one, I wanted to experience the views, and I would recommend anyone hike in the Himalayas because the views are absolutely unbelievable. I couldn't even describe them because what I didn't realize was there was about 20 mountains about 100 feet from the size of Everest. Everest gets all the attention and gets that singular photo that you always see, but it's actually set amongst 100 mountains, 20 of which are just a few hundred feet shorter. So that scenery is incredible, and the higher you go, then honestly, the nearer to God you feel. But it gets to I got to about 18,000 feet. Now, remember, I've trained for a year and I felt pretty good. Then every moment pretty much after that, my body was screaming at me, turn around and go down. And I think we got to just under 24,000 feet, and by which time you can't sleep, your heart's beating too fast because there's not enough oxygen. You have to have special lamps because you can't strike a match or light a flame because there's not enough oxygen to burn. We did we did have oxygen tanks with us, but I was refusing to use them like an idiot because of my, manly sort of machoism. And at the point, so the Sherpas who took that, there was a team of 20 people for two climbers. That tells you how intense things are. And the two lead Sherpas have the power to arrest you if they feel, because once you get altitude sickness, some people say I don't make rational decisions at sea level, but you certainly don't make them at 24,000 feet. So the video they shared with me after we came down, I thought I was going very slowly, but with my ice picks and my foot hooks, just going up very slowly, but in a straight line. And when they showed me the video, I was hardly moving at all. And the biggest distance I did was sideways, both ways. I didn't go forward at all, which is why they, very calmly said, and they also told me, don't grip your hands and toes, which you do because you forget because you're not thinking straight. And the most painful thing about the whole journey was coming down, your feet and hands unfreeze. And honestly, it was like someone jamming a knitting needle into each for about 15 minutes. It was agonizing. But they turn you around because they know, prolonged exposure like that will do serious damage. And I was very happy to turn down. But some people, some serious climbers, and I think you've probably heard about the famous book of people who die trying to ascend these mountains, they have such a strong objective that they can't rationally see the situation around them and realize it's not in their interest to continue. And that's what the Sherpas taught me, what great students of human nature they are, because they told me afterwards that I would be easy to turn around, that, they could have turned me around at 8,000 feet and I would have said, yeah, that was fantastic. Got some great photos. I'll be off now. But my partner, who was very, very, I don't know, insistent on going higher. He really wanted to summit, but we knew that was probably impossible. But he wanted to go higher than any mountain in the US, which I think might be Kinley, I think. I'm not sure which mountain. But they'd figured that out. So they told him he was 100 feet past that summit when he turned around. And I, to this day, joked to him that he wasn't. They just said that because that's what they knew would make him turn around, because he wasn't behaving very responsibly at the time.
Well, that's an incredible experience. And, thank goodness for the Sherpas and their wisdom and knowledge. I think that's a great segue to just discussing some of the influential people or some of the influential moments in your life. And I know life happens and we can look back and observe like, that stood out as a learning opportunity or an aha moment. What comes to mind when you're looking back and kind of scanning over your career of either people or moments that have stood out for you?
Sadly, one of the best moments I have is when I was a complete idiot. So, like I said, I had a long career at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Very early in that career, I was invited to a meeting with a colleague who was a peer, to a meeting in San Francisco where we were by far the most junior people. It was a very senior trading meeting. We both had little presentations, and we were by far the most junior people there. So it was a big honor to be there. And I worked for this gentleman who's retired now. He now has a horse ranch in California. But he'd been in the finance business a long time, started with Chemical Bank. He was an older gentleman, very knowledgeable. He was my boss in Asia. And I went to this meeting knowing that my colleague had a couple of errors in their presentation, which I'd read through the materials the night before. And I chose not to point it out to him, to say, hey, you might want to correct these couple of things, because I was very competitive. Needless to say, it became obvious in that meeting I'd seen the error and not helped him. And my boss was furious. And he said to me, the one quote I always bear in mind to this day, he said, for a really smart guy, you can be really stupid. And he was basically telling me it won't be long before Keith, who was the other gentleman's name, sees a problem with your presentation and won't tell you because you haven't earned a credit with him. And that's just not the way to behave professionally. And this is honestly a true story, Nathan. 15 years later, I interviewed for a job in Bank of America London that I coveted. And everybody told me with my experience and knowledge, I was a shoo-in for. But the last part of the interview process was a panel of 3 people. And one of them was Keith. And the first person to call me to tell me I didn't have the job was Keith. So he bided his time. And because I hadn't built trust, instead of him voting for me, he voted against. So that was one lesson. And I often, the gentleman I told you, I look at leaders, and I often find no leader, including myself, is perfect. But lots have very good qualities, and some have bad qualities. So I try and identify the bad and never watch out for them in myself, especially in stressful moments where you might not be reacting with the demeanor you care for. And then I obviously look at the good and I try and adopt them. I try and be to everybody. I try to treat everybody the way I expect to be treated. And those are the best recommendations. I tell it to all the interns as they come into Schwab, that trust begins day one with the people sat around you and everyone else you come in touch with. Like I said, you want to be the person that everybody wants to work with or for because of your reputation. And your reputation is every minute. And our marketing chap always says reputations take years to build and moments to destroy. So you have to be on point every second.
Well, that's real life wisdom that was born out of experience, and thanks for your transparency on that, because I think that those are the lessons that and moments that we learn in life the most is when we can see ourselves through the lens of others, and to recognize that reciprocity is in play in many cases, and to have alertness around that. So as you look back, what would you give a 20-year-old Ian advice around? What would be some things that you would tell him knowing what you know now?
It goes back, first thing I would tell him is build trust with everybody. If you see errors, be competitive, because I was very competitive at the time, but be team competitive. Make sure your team wins, not that you as an individual play really well and members of the team, or your team fails, but you stand out. So be team competitive always. And then, some of the things I truly appreciated about the career choices I did make was living in Asia, living in Europe, living in the US, and recognizing the world, particularly today where you see biases in news media and, reports of things given, one side or the other, and both sides infuriate me, by the way. I have for many years now, I listen to the BBC in the morning, CNN or Fox during the day, and then NKA, the Japanese channel, in the evening, because all report the news as, the same news items, but all report them in a very different way. And so what I always say, particularly to my daughters, is look for balance, get both sides of every argument, whether it's professional, business, investment, news. There's always 2 sides to everything, if not many sides. So try and put yourself out there to learn what everybody's about, because I see more and more, as everybody sees more and more of a divide being created when we all should be coming together.
I think the greatest thing that we can do in a time of turbulence or of divide is to remain steady and to stay grounded. And I think that's a life lesson that you shared today, and I really appreciate that. Ian, it's been a pleasure spending time with you. Want to wish you the best, and I look forward to continuing our conversations and more reflections about what happens in Day in a Canoe.
Great to speak with you too, Nathan, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for listening and tuning in to Day in a Canoe. We're thrilled to have you as part of our community. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share it with your friends and loved ones. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on social media platforms by searching Day in a Canoe. We'll see you next time.